And hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Michael Bryant with you for the beginning of the afternoon session here. And I got to tell you, there's nothing going on. I got nothing for you. We'll just fill the next 3 hours with something. Oh, yeah, that Mueller thing came out. The Mueller report is out, came out about an hour ago. It is on lawandcrime.com. You want to go check that out. Read along with me. In fact, I think maybe we'll just fill the next few hours. I'll just begin reading it. Just when you have it ready, let me know, and I'll just start reading along with you. It'd probably be the best way to go with this. That is something we're going to talk about here very quickly. I have Matt Mangino standing by. We also, remember, it's back. The McStay murder case is back, still ongoing in California, and we're going to get into that courtroom for day 42. They're set to go live. Remember, it's California time. They're set to go live at 12:30 Eastern time. We will be back in that courtroom. As a refresher, of course, here's the defendant, Charles Chase Merritt, alleged to have beaten to death his former business partner, Joseph McStay, and, for good measure, his wife, Summer, the 4-year-old Gianni, and then Joseph Jr., the 3-year-old. All of them, their remains found in a shallow grave in the Mojave Desert. Just a horrible case that has been playing out really over the last almost 4 months, but 42 court days. And that is supposed to be wrapping up. The defense putting on their case now. So before we get to that, first of all, Matt Mangino, thank you for joining me this afternoon. I'm pretty sure you haven't read the entire Mueller report just yet. I did. I heard Gene Rossi mention earlier the Evelyn Wood speed reading course. I took that course in college. And if you're looking for a way to ruin one of the great pleasures of life, reading, take the Evelyn Wood speed reading course, because it will ruin anything you ever read. It's effective. I was reading 10,000 words a minute, could have cared less about those words, but I got the comprehension, I had the retention, and it worked and got me through some college courses. How's your speed reading there, Matt?
Well, I don't know if I can do 10,000 words a minute, but it certainly would be useful today, at least initially, to get through the redacted Mueller report.
So, 448 pages. I don't know. I haven't seen it stacked up yet to know if they're equally split amongst the two key arguments and investigations, which is, of course, collusion, Part A, and then Part B, the obstruction of justice. Any thoughts in general before we delve into some of the specifics? Here's the cover page for you. Any thoughts about what you think this report will do, won't do, what it really means in the big picture?
Well, I think what I've learned of it in the last hour or so, seems to be interesting. And also, if you look back at what Attorney General Barr had said in his press conference before the report was released, although he makes it clear that the report indicates that the Trump campaign or President Trump neither conspired with the Russian government. But what I think is really important about this report, and that we should look at very carefully, is the fact that Attorney General Barr and the special counsel, Robert Mueller, said that the Russian government tried to illegally or did illegally influence the election. Certainly we should be concerned about the president and whether he did anything wrong in this instance, but we should be extremely alarmed that the Russian government intentionally interfered in this last presidential election with the effort to try to influence the outcome. That should make Americans shudder. Certainly we want to know if the president obstructed justice, but what are we doing to prevent the Russian government or any other government around the world from interfering in the 2020 election?
Right, and there has certainly been evidence that not just Russian governments, but others have continually tried to do that. That is their goal. I think there's a misperception on the part of a lot of folks who think that the actual vote count or the mechanism for counting votes was somehow altered or attacked or in jeopardy, and that's just not the case. That is not what this is about, right?
Right. It's about them trying to influence public opinion about the candidates, to try to cause some unrest among the citizens of the United States. But it's still, even though it doesn't directly impact the actual vote count, to have outside influences who have some maybe nefarious intent involved in influencing the electorate in this country should be alarming. And certainly these issues with regard to collusion seem to be resolved. It's indicated that the president or anybody in the campaign did not collude with the Russian government in their efforts. But the other issue here, was there some obstruction? Was there some obstruction of justice? And I think the Mueller report lays out 10 instances where there was some effort to influence. Maybe those influences were unsuccessful in terms of obstructing justice. But if you look at 10 different efforts here by the president, successful or unsuccessful, certainly he thought he had something to be concerned about, because he apparently wanted this investigation to end prematurely.
Yeah, you make a good point, and I want to make just my own point about the overall report, and that is this. If you care enough to read it, and you should care enough to read it, use what you read to form your opinion. Don't repeat and parrot back other opinions you've heard here, there, elsewhere. Read it. See what it really means to you, so that you have an informed opinion and you're not just grabbing one party line or the other. Fascinating reading, probably not in its entirety, but there's going to be some nuggets in there. And as Matt just mentioned, it's very important that we understand exactly what this investigation was all about. Now, as I mentioned, the report is broken into two pieces, basically the collusion segment and the obstruction segment. And most of the focus will be on that obstruction segment, because there has been so much said about the lack of collusion and the wavering opinion on the obstruction case. So let's take a look at a quick note that's from the report itself. And this says, quote, "The evidence we obtained about the president's actions and intent presents difficult issues that would need to be resolved if we were making a traditional prosecutorial judgment." Mueller also wrote, at the same time, "If we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state." So again, this is about as waffly as we had been led to believe it might be. Even more important that you read the entire report. If nothing else, read the second part of it on the obstruction of justice issue. Hey, Matt, what do you think about that excerpt from the report, and what that kind of does to help, or does it help us understand the obstruction issue?
Well, I think it plainly says, if the Office of Special Counsel would have found, with regard to obstruction of justice, that there was no criminal activity, that they would have said so. This is, sort of legal speak. This is an independent prosecutor who initially said that there were some issues that he couldn't resolve because it's not in his purview, but also says that, hey, if there was no criminal obstruction, we would have said so with regard to the president. So I think it kind of limits the expanse of his investigation, so to speak, but it also says, listen, we're not exonerating the president in this report.
Which seems to be the case with the collusion, was much more adamant, we found nothing. So it seems to me this is a green light for those in Congress who might feel that, hey, we've got something to run with. Let's go, let's do it. This is at least a kind of an entree to further investigation, yes?
Right, and I think that Robert Mueller has concluded in this report that his decision, or his failure to make a final decision on the issue of obstruction of justice, doesn't mean that Congress can't go forward with this. The fact that he made no prosecutorial decision with regard to obstruction of justice does not mean that Congress can't move forward if they think that there's something appropriate with regard to the president's conduct.
And clearly there have been rattlings that is exactly what's going to happen in this report. From the excerpts we're looking at, don't put any sort of end to that kind of talk. So we'll see what happens going forward. I do believe too, Matt, tell me what you think about this, that if you were anti-collusion, anti-obstruction in that camp prior to the report, if you were in pro-collusion, pro-obstruction camp before the report, those minds aren't going to change much based on this report.
Well, that's unfortunate. That's the unfortunate thing about the political climate in this country right now. I mean, we're hyper partisan. So if you favor the president, you're going to find a lot in this report that says, hey, this was all just a political witch hunt, and that the president didn't do anything wrong. If you're opposed to the president, you're going to look at this report and say, hey, there's a lot here. And we need to move forward on these things. Robert Mueller didn't exonerate him. There may not be criminal charges coming, but hey, there's a lot we can do in the Congress and other places with regard to this matter. That's the unfortunate climate of politics in this country right now.
Yeah, and that's the point I'm trying to make. I agree entirely. Okay, we're going to take a quick break here. I don't know how many employers right now across the country are losing work time because their employees are a little busy. It's kind of like when they're filling out their brackets for the NC2A. A little more important. We're going through bits and pieces of the Mueller report. It is out today. It's available on lawandcrime.com. Get it. Read it yourself. Don't wait for the movie to come out. It's important that you read it, and we're doing our best to synthesize through it as we can. It just came out an hour and 15 minutes ago. And so we're pulling from it some of the things that seem to be most interesting, maybe most controversial. Let me take a look at now one little clip here, one little segment of the report that I think is interesting. This part reads, and this again is from, I believe, from the obstruction portion of the report. President Trump reacted negatively to the special counsel's appointment. He told advisors that it was the end of his presidency, sought to have Attorney General Jeff Sessions unrecused from the Russia investigation, and to have the special counsel removed, and engaged in efforts to curtail the special counsel's investigation and prevent the disclosure of evidence to it, including through public and private contacts with potential witnesses. Those and related actions are described and analyzed in Volume 2 of the report. So this actually was part of a prefatory statement, it appears, and directs the reader to look at Volume 2 for specifics on those actions that have been detailed in this, like I said, apparently a bit of a preface on the report. Matt Mangino, I find the preface kind of interesting. It kind of synthesizes a chunk of what readers might find later in the core report. It almost seems like it's done, for those of us who just want to pour through it as quickly as possible. Is this good? Is it a good idea to kind of lead the way?
Well, I think that it's, normally in reports you find some summary of what you're going to tell readers as you go forward, kind of like an argument to a court. Here's what we're going to tell you, and then you tell them what you're going to tell them. The interesting thing about this paragraph or introductory portion of the report is that it seems to contradict completely what Attorney General Barr said at 9:30 this morning in his press conference. He said unequivocally that the president and the staff of the White House cooperated fully with regard to this investigation. And then this paragraph pulled right out of Mueller's report seems to say that the president didn't. So you wonder what Attorney General Barr's purpose was in having a press conference before the release of the report and saying things that don't seem to be consistent with the actual report.
That's a good point. And let's listen to a little bit of that press conference again. This is Attorney General William Barr this morning at 9:30-ish, kind of a preface to the report, which, as we've just noticed, carries its own prefaces. So William Barr steps into the pit there to have his press conference, and he opens the matter up for questions. Matt Mangino, I'm going to throw you in the pit with the other media types. What would your question be to William Barr in this setting as we saw it roll out this morning?
Well, my question would be, based on your review, Mr. Attorney General, of the report, clearly Robert Mueller has not exonerated the president. So where does that leave, the investigation of obstruction of justice? You've indicated that there's no basis to prosecute obstruction of justice. And what's your decision-making process with regard to that issue?
And in other words, what do you think? Is there going to be more information that comes out that would change your opinion as to whether or not there is something to prosecute on the obstruction of justice level? Let's take a look at another clip. As you can imagine, these reporters have been, they may ultimately have some concern that the Attorney General is having this press conference, but believe me, they're having one. They're going to take advantage of it. One of the questions was basically one of those that relates to investigating the investigators. What about Mueller? Would he testify before Congress? Now, when that press conference ended, the president, who does like himself a tweet here or there, put one together, had his own opinion as to the impact of the press conference. And yeah, that's not a Photoshop deal. I didn't create that, and our folks in the graphics department didn't do that. That is an actual tweet sent out by the president, game over, and a little homage to the Game of Thrones. So nobody in our particular fight has a fire-breathing dragon, but certainly it's been a bit of a war over the last couple of years. It may or may not be done. Matt Mangino, I think this is probably going to upset some people, saying, oh, he's trivializing this very important process. It may appeal to others that are on the fringe of politics and don't live and breathe politics because, you know, he's made a pop culture reference. What do you think?
Well, you know, I tweet every once in a while myself, and I can assure you that I wouldn't be able to, in a matter of minutes, create a tweet that looked like that, that was professionally done like that. So obviously that tweet was prepared sometime in the past, and only because the president and his staff and his private attorneys had an opportunity to review this report before Congress and before the public. So I guess you know, when you get a heads up like that, you can make a fancy tweet and send it out immediately after the press conference.
So yeah, you're going to have to get your own art department there, Matt, so you have that stuff ready to go when necessary. You just send. Hey, Matt, I know you've got to run. I want to thank you for taking some time this afternoon to talk about this case and the Mueller report. So great job as always. Thank you, sir. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Michael.
You bet. And we'll be back with more on the Law and Crime Network. Stay right where you are.